So welcome back to another session on methodology of literature. We continue with where we stopped. We stopped with polyphony and dialogism. We understood how it is different. Polyphony is different from monology, and we also understood what makes a novel according to Bakhtin literary, and that is by giving it plurality. According to him, it is in Dostoevsky's novels, or he has found Dostoevsky's novels a great example for plurality, where the novelist or the author gives voice to almost all the characters in the novel rather than seeing it from a single authorial concern. So we can call polyphony multi-accentuating novel, or polyphony is otherwise multi-accentuality. Okay, he started with polyphony, and I did tell you in his biography that he was exposed to various languages. He knew many languages. He was a polyglot. You can call him a polyglot, and therefore he started with the novels of Dostoevsky and slowly moved to used this theory to prove how language as such functions. See, Bakhtin is also related to the structuralists. Okay, he's also related to the school of structuralism. So he wanted to show how this theory also functions in language. Now, what next topic that you have to study before moving on to heteroglossia, that is also there, the concept is also there in your textbook. So, I hope I'll be able to do justice to the topics that we are to deal with. So, so much for the talk, so much for the chit chat, as I.A. Richards would call it, and let's get to the topic. So, before moving on to heteroglossia, we have to understand another topic, and that is polyglossia. Okay, so I told you he started with polyphony and he used it to show plurality in Dostoevsky's novels, all right, and also various other dramas as well. But he used this to show how this plurality functions in language also. So what is this polyphony, or what is plurality? Before moving on to polyglossia also, let's understand how plurality or polyphony works in language. Now, what is interesting is to note that according to Bakhtin, dialogism is not something unique to literature or art. It is a universal phenomenon, and it permeates all human speech and all relationships and of human life. So it's not just to deal with literature or art, but it is to deal with the whole concept of this dialogism. This plurality is to do with human communication, human life as such. Now, he elaborates on why dialogism is a universal characteristic in human discourse. He argues that whenever we direct our utterance towards an object, physical or abstract, then our words enter into a dialogue with other utterances. As Bakhtin writes, between the world and its object, between the word and the speaking subject, there exists an elastic environment of other, that is, the alien words about the same object. Unquote. Now, let me explain this in detail. Well, the idea is very simple. Imagine discussing a movie with your friend or your sister, or arguing with your teachers about the strict discipline of the college, or having a different viewpoint of the restaurant near your house, or perhaps take an abstract idea itself. You're talking about features of romantic features in Keats, or you're speaking about the nature of romanticism in Keats' poems. Now, all of these instances, what happens is your utterances are directed towards an object, right? And what you utter, some of these utterances are material, like the movie that you were talking about with your sister, or the argument that you had with your friend about the restaurant, the best restaurant nearby, or with your teachers about the strict discipline of the college, is all material. Whereas the argument or your viewpoint of the nature of romanticism of Keats' poem is abstract. So whether it is an abstract idea or a material idea, that is physical idea, it is directed towards an object. Now, none of these utterances are spoken in vacuum. All of these objects have, and besides, all these that you utter, your words are also, that is, your viewpoints, your words enter into a space. Enter into, it's not a vacuum. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It enters into an elastic environment, an invisible environment. And in this invisible environment, whatever utterances that you have already spoken to a particular person get involved in an elastic environment. Okay, so it does not happen in vacuum. It enters into a space, an invisible space. So these words that you have already spoken are comprehensible because it has already been uttered by many people, or it has already been spoken about by many others. It's not a new phenomenon. It's not a new thing. Though it is you speaking about it, these words, these utterances has already been spoken by others. All right. Another example would be romanticism in Keats. Now, you may have thought of, after reading Keats' poem, you may have thought of romanticism and you share your idea with your friend. This idea has already been shared by several others, say 100 years before you. And it will keep on being uttered by others after you also. So all these utterances gets into an imaginary or an invisible space, an elastic environment. All right. So your utterances in a dialogue with these previous utterances is precisely being a dialogue that has all the peculiarities of a dialogic relation. That means your dialogues has plurality. It is not your own. It is not a singular authorial feeling or an authorial utterance, whereas it has a plurality. So this polyphony that you studied in the novel is applicable here also because it has plurality. If I were to come up with utterance that is something unique, or not unique, that nobody has ever heard of, say for instance, I invent my own language. okay, and I start speaking that language, it will be gibberish, right? You will not, nobody will understand anything. Why? Because it has not entered a space of plurality. It is again a singular authorial concern, or it is a singular authorial voice, because it is something that I have invented and nobody else knows of it. So there is a lack of plurality in it. Okay, and it therefore doesn't make sense. So when does it make sense? It makes sense when it enters a plurality, a realm of plurality. Only then things makes sense. Okay, and therefore any concrete language use is automatically a dialogue, because utterances can be meaningful once it enters the tension-filled environment of other words which are articulated by people whose consciousness that are independent, and unmerged than my own. So my dialogues, any concrete language, what happens to it? It automatically becomes a dialogue once it enters this tension-filled environment, this elastic environment of other words, alien words, other words uttered by others, articulated by other consciousness, and those consciousness or those people who utter these dialogues, they are independent, they are unmerged from my own. I don't even know them. They might have the same, like for instance, if you are speaking about Sushant Singh Rajput and his death or his suicide, it's not just, it's likely that so many people may have spoken about the same thing. You are saying your viewpoint. So it's not a singular thing. It has a plurality in it, the viewpoint itself. So it is not that you are giving your viewpoint to others, you are sharing that plurality. There is a plurality there. Your utterances also enters the utterances of others, and those utterances, that is by others whom you don't even know, are independent, their own utterances, and they are unique, and they are unmerged from yours. Okay, so that means that you don't have, it is not a singular viewpoint. It's not just your viewpoint. Okay, so things get more comprehensible only when there is plurality. Okay, when we speak from different perspectives, and it is independent and it is unmerged. Okay, our arguments, our viewpoints, our assertions are things which were already articulated by many others whom we have never met, and thus it is not a singular view. It is not just mine or your sister's view or my friend's view about nature of romanticism in kids, or the movie that have similar opinions, or the restaurant that I know. These things have already been articulated by many others before me, or before you, or even after you. Thus it is unmerged, and it is independent view, and it is not just our own. Next, we are going to move to the next concepts, and that is heteroglossia. So Bakhtin has not just given us heteroglossia carnivalis, he has also given us another concept, chronotop, but you don't have it in your course of study, so we will not be going into chronotop, but we will be moving in detail. We will be doing the heteroglossia and carnivalis. But before moving on to heteroglossia, I want you to understand polyglossia first. So it is connected with heteroglossia. Okay. Now you will remember Bakhtin, through his concept of polyphony, was it was a theory, or he was working on the theory of multiplicity and plurality. So you will always remember Bakhtin as a person or a theorist who is always into this plurality and multiplicity of voices, unmerged voices and multiple voices in the text. Heteroglossia is another way of studying this plurality, but here the difference is it is at the level of language in general, and not in the level of stylistic features that exist in a literary text. So heteroglossia is all to do with language in general, how we speak, the plurality in our language. Now what we just saw, we did a small instance with polyphony, how it works in language. I know you may have a little difficulty in understanding that, but you will not have that much of difficulty in understanding of polyglossia and heteroglossia. So here heteroglossia is all to do with language as such. Before we make this transition from polyphony to heteroglossia, we need to deal with another term, and Bakhtin introduces these two terms in his book Dialogic Imagination, and the term is polyglossia. Now what is polyglossia? The word polyglossia might seem or sound unfamiliar to those who are not acquainted with Bakhtin's theory. It is a term related to polyglot. Now what is a polyglot, or who is a polyglot? A polyglot is a person who can speak many languages, or he can write and understand and speak many languages, like Bakhtin. Okay, so polyglossia therefore means many languagedness. But what does it mean in Bakhtin's theory? Polyglot means many languagedness. How is it related with Bakhtin's theory? Well, according to Bakhtin, polyglossia shatters the myth of national language. Now I want you to listen carefully. So first we have to understand what is national language. Now within this multilingual Indian context, relating the nation to one language or with one language might sound like an alien idea. But in Europe it was different. It was the sense of nationalism is something that you can see even to this very day. So the nationalist argument of France in the country would argue on French speakers, or the nationalist argument of France is France as a country of French speakers, and the nationalist argument of Germany would be a country of German speakers. That of Spain would be that of Spanish speakers. For us, it is an alien idea. But to these Europeans, they gave prime importance to linguistic similarity, or their concept was of linguistic. To them, nationalism is equal to or is connected with language. The same speakers, or the speakers of a similar language means one nation. Okay, so now you have to also remember that the boundaries of these European nations as individual nation states, it is a relatively recent one, that came about only after the World War, the First World War. Earlier or before the First World War, you know that these nations were not developed. They were just small provinces which were under the rule of the monarchy, or which were occupied or conquered by some authorial king or empire. So it was only after this First World War that this nation boundaries, the whole thing of dividing the European nations into individual nation states emerged. So the point here is all these European states or European countries, they are associated with nation and language. So that is the reason why I stressed on what is called the national language. The national language of France is French. The national language of Germany is German, okay, etc. But if you look at our Indian nation, many of you have this concept or this notion that we also have a national language. We often say that the national language of India is Hindi. You are wrong, my dear children. We do not have a national language because we are multilingual states. So anyway, what Bakhtin was against was this concept of national language. He did not like this idea. He said this is just a rubbish idea. It's a myth. You know, you remember Bakhtin was brought up in various provinces of Russia, and therefore he came into contact with several languages in Russia. He spoke German because his governess was a German tutor, and therefore he picked up German from her. He also went, he said he was brought up in several provinces of Russia which spoke Polish, which spoke several other languages, Russian languages, and therefore he was used or he was exposed to many language and many culture, but the language and those culture, several Russian states also spoke Polish, several states spoke German, and therefore there was no connection with the nation and the language, and therefore he understood that it is just a myth, it is just a construct, and therefore he wanted to shatter this construct. Since any form of nationalism stresses on exclusivity, there is often a myth of uniqueness surrounding that national language too. So according to many, or according to them, a national language is exclusive. As long as a national language is exclusive, it is considered to be pure form. It is considered to be unique. Okay, and therefore the national languages are considered as pure and uncontaminated, and they are looked in isolation. According to Bakhtin, polyglossia shatters this myth of purity and isolation. We saw that in how our English language itself was made. It is a merge of Celtic language, it is a merge of Scandinavian, it has the hues of Scandinavian languages, it has French dialects, it has German dialects, it has Roman, Latin dialects, Latin languages, and therefore it is a merge of so many languages, right? And likewise here he says polyglossia points out that the language's dialogic relationship with foreign language. So dialogic relationship, dialogic relationship with a foreign language would mean plurality again, right? So it shatters the myth. It shatters the myth of a national language being unique. It shatters the myth of a national language being pure or isolated. It cannot be pure, it cannot be isolated, it is not uncontaminated. It is a merge of different languages. Now he gives it, he speaks about polyglossia in depth. He says polyglossia is more easily understood with our Indian context. Take any of our vernacular Indian languages that we might speak. We will soon realize, for instance, Malayalam. We will soon realize that we do not use the language in isolation. Rather, our language use is constantly formed by the presence of other languages. Be it the English language, which is our colonial heritage, or colonial inheritance, or the other Indian languages that we speak. So this helps us to understand the dialogic relationship that we discussed just now. Our utterances, what happens again, I would come back to polyphony again. What happens to our utterances? Our utterances in any one language enters a tension-filled space where it interacts and illuminates, or interacts and rebounds from the other alien utterances of foreign languages. Thus, for example, I'll give you the example. The English that I am speaking to you is constantly being intermingled or inter-illuminated in my mind with the other languages like Malayalam, because when I try to tell you something, I try to comprehend, or I try to think about this concept, my thoughts are happening in Malayalam. So there is a merge of English and Malayalam going on in my mind. It is inter-illuminated. It gets inter-illuminated, and in that tension-filled space, which is invisible. It is like, it is an imaginary space. Okay, it enters a tension-filled space and it intermingles. It gets inter-illuminated. And likewise, they say the same thing happens when I talk in Malayalam also. Since I know another language, since I only know English and Malayalam, I can only speak in terms of English and Malayalam. A little bit of Tamil also, I am able to comprehend it, right? When I watch a Tamil movie, I am able to comprehend it because I can connect it with Malayalam, a little bit with Malayalam. Right, and I'm able to understand also. So what is happening is the same thing is the same technique is working. It gets illuminated in my mind in this tension filled space, and it interacts and it rebounds. Okay, so the presence, so when I talk in Malayalam, the presence of English is unmistakably present there, since I know English and Malayalam. These two languages gets illuminated. It interacts and rebounds. If I knew, say, some other languages, if I were a polyglot, perhaps even those languages would get intermingled. So conceptually, it boils down to this, that he is attacking the myth of unity or homogeneity. He says that such unity, such homogeneity, such singularity does not exist. It's a myth. It's a construct. It's a myth. Okay? It's an error. So there is always a plurality. It is not a singular notion. Singularity does not, it's not about singularity. So you cannot write texts which are a single authorial voice. All right, it has to be plural, because life is concerned with plurality. Even our languages are concerned with plurality. So how can you write a text or write a novel based on singularity? It has to have a world view, it has to have a plurality. Only then it can be comprehensible to the readers. If it is just the writer's viewpoint, it needn't it cannot be called a true text or a true literary text. it cannot be called true literature. A true literature must be able to give a plurality of voices, because even in language there exists plurality. So he's totally, what does he do? Bhaktin is totally attacking this myth of unity or homogeneity. So polyglossia, what is in polyphony? He is attacking the myth of single voice or homogeneous authorial voice. And in polyglossia, what does he attack? He attacks the myth of an isolated and homogeneous linguistic nationalism. There's no such thing as linguistic nationalism or national language. Now, if you have understood what polyglossia is, we can slowly move on to heteroglossia. Okay. Now, heteroglossia one of the best way to understand heteroglossia is again through the term polyglossia. So, what polyglossia does to language externally, heteroglossia does to the language internally. In other words, heteroglossia signifies a language as dialogicized from within. Okay, so what does it mean to dialogicize a language from within? To make it plural from within. How does this plurality work from within? So I want you to think about a language you use in your day-to-day context, say Malayalam. You will see that when you are speaking the same language, you are speaking it differently on the context, upon the audience, upon whether you are connected with the audience or the person whom you are talking to or not, whether he's a stranger, whether you are talking over the phone, whether you are doing a video conference, whether you are able to see, whether you're not able to see, whether you're talking to the police officers, all these. Okay, so if you think about how you speak the above said or the language, your language Malayalam, in the above said instances, you will understand that we use language differently. When we talk to our parents, our tone, our intonation, our way of language is different. When we talk to our friends, it is different. When we talk to our beloved, it is different. When we talk to our children, it is different. When you talk to us teachers, it is different. When you talk to the police officer or the traffic police, it is different. So each time when you use the language, you use it in a plural way. You are not using a singular tone. You are not using the language in a singular or way. You are using a plurality of this language. So this means that even when we are using one particular language, our usage of the language is thoroughly stratified and pluralized from within. It is different, isn't it? This internal stratification is called heteroglossia. And since each of these stratified components interact with and inter-illuminate each other, this is just like polyglossia. Here also we come across a dialogic relationship. They interact and they illuminate. Okay, so the plurality is how, or in heteroglossia, in the sense of heteroglossia, it's about how we use the same language differently. It is from within, dialogicized from within, whereas polyglossia is external, outside. Okay, whether there is inter-illumination or rebounding and interaction of two different languages, our language with a foreign language. Okay, now thus polyglossia dialogicizes a language externally by bringing it in contact with other languages. Heteroglossia does it internally by establishing an interplay between the various stratification of that language depending on the context, depending on the audience, depending on your temperament, depending on your relation with them, etc. Now, a novel which has different characteristics from different social strata against each other in different conditions and contexts would obviously be called or will be using this dialogism of language. So what he says is, what it means is, Bakhtin uses it in the novels also. In the novel, you will have different characters, and each different characters coming from different social strata of the society, and when they come into contact their utterances again shows a plurality. Okay, there is a dialogism of language. Clear? Thus, it is no wonder that Bakhtin started with the novels of Dostoevsky to gradually build his first theory of polyphony, and then more sophisticated concepts of polyglossia and heteroglossia. But remember, dialogism is not any special feature of any literary genre. It is it just informs us and what the concrete use of language is. It is not a specific genre. Okay, so this is closely connected with structuralism or the structuralist thinkers. And now we come to the last point of Bakhtin's concept, and that is carnivalesque. Now, the word carnivalesque is derived from the familiar root word carnival, which signifies an occasion of festivity and celebration. And the most iconic image that comes to our mind is that of a spectacle involving parades of riotous crowds, bright colors, wild revelry. പൂരപ്പറമ്പ് കണ്ടിട്ടില്ലേ? പൂരം പെരുന്നാളൊക്കെ വരുമ്പോഴത്തേക്കും ബ്രൈറ്റ് കളേഴ്സും ആകമൊത്തം ഒരു എക്സൈറ്റ്മെൻറ്റ്, വൈൽഡ് റെവൽറി, കുറച്ച് പേര് വെള്ളം അടിച്ച് നടക്കുന്നുണ്ടാവും, ആന, ചെണ്ട, കൊട്ട്. It is also a place where there you can expect a riotous crowd, right? So Bakhtin points out that carnivals he speaks about carnivals as being a very integral part of the European society. Now, based on this carnival, he brought out this technique of carnivalesque. Now, according to this carnivalesque, it is a subversion and turning upside down of social hierarchies. അതായത് ഈ പൂരത്തിൽ കളിക്കുന്ന ഈ ചില ഡ്രാമ ഒക്കെ അല്ലേ, ഗാനമേള ഉണ്ടാവും, അതേപോലെ തന്നെ കുറേ ഡ്രാമയൊക്കെ ഉണ്ടാവും. അപ്പോൾ ആ ഡ്രാമയിൽ ചിലപ്പോൾ ഒരു വിഡ്ഢിയായ ഒരു രാജാവിനെയോ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ തല്ലിപ്പൊളിയായ ഒരു പള്ളിയിലെ വികാരിനെയോ ഒക്കെ ആയിരിക്കാം കാണിക്കുന്നുണ്ടാവുക. പക്ഷേ ഇത് യാഥാർത്ഥ്യത്തിൽ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ റിയാലിറ്റിയിൽ ഇത് കാണിക്കുകയാണെങ്കിൽ എന്തു പറ്റും? ഇവരെ പിടിച്ച് അകത്തിടും അല്ലേ? ഇവരെന്നല്ല, ആരായാലും, ആ കാണിക്കുന്ന ആരായാലും, ഇഫ് ഹീ ഈസ് ഗോയിങ് ടു പ്രസൻറ്റ് ദ കിങ് ആസ് എ ഫൂൾ, what would happen? The king would the king soldiers would definitely have him arrested. So carnivals were a very important or integral part of the medieval period. Okay, so this carnival is actually a technique or a carnivals were something that could be found in almost all the medieval history or medieval European history. Now, Bakhtin, when he looked at this carnivals or the idea behind these carnivals, he noticed that these carnivals were in a way of subverting the social hierarchies in such a way that they don't get into trouble. See, that even the authorities would look at it and smile and perhaps applaud also. So if you have in a carnival, when you are playing a drama and you present the majesty or the king as an absolute good for nothing fellow, perhaps even the king who is watching it would applaud to you, because it is just a drama played in a carnival or a street play, or even the authorities or the police authorities or the people, the subjects would also agree, wouldn't mind. And in a way, Bakhtin says that this is a different form of subverting the social hierarchy. So in general, it is a turning of upside down of the social norms as they otherwise know, playing the foolish over the wise, the poor over the rich. So Bakhtin noted that underlying principle or the spirit of these carnival was to challenge. Now what that is important. The spirit of these carnivals was to challenge and even degrade. It was like a protest in a kind which was accepted by the authorities, because it is the safe side. It is in a protest from the safe side or from the safe zone. So this technique of turning upside down or subverting the social hierarchy or the social ladder or the social norms was in a way to challenge and even degrade the hierarchical regulations that guided the medieval societies and constructed the formal and official truth about it. One instance would be, if you get a chance to mimic the teachers, you would mimic all the teachers, right? And we teachers would also look at it and say, we may applaud to it, because what happens there is you are being allowed to mimic us with our permission. And in a way, you are taking a better revenge on whatever has happened to you. So this is like, so therefore this is quite similar to Bakhtin's Carnivalesque. Okay. So Bakhtin writes in his book Rebellious and His World, quote, Carnival celebrated tempering liberation from the prevailing truth and formed the established order. It marked the suspension of all hierarchical rank, privileges, norms and prohibitions, unquote. Now this turning upside down the social hierarchies and norms through laughter dismantled, however, temporarily the official and formal discourses and truth of the social existence and situated them within a field of multiple other possibilities. So what is Carnivalesque? Carnivalesque refers to those narratives or narrative forms, be it drama, be it novels, where social hierarchies and power structures oriented around positions of high and low are temporarily inverted. In order to what? In order to destabilize and to make comic that which is to be taken seriously within the social order. It is there in your textbook. The last page, towards the last page, you have the glossary where you have Carnivalesque, and it is to be learnt by heart. So what is Carnivalesque? Refers to narratives or narrative forms where the social hierarchies and power structures oriented around positions of high and low are temporarily inverted. And this is done often in the form of parody in order to, why? In order to destabilize and to make comic that which is taken seriously, like the king, the clergy, those who are taken, whom we view with reverence within the social order. They are being made fun of or parodied. Okay. Example, a play where a fool plays the role of a king. The king is a serious form within the social order or the social hierarchy or structure, the head, or playing the role of our Prime Minister or our Chief Minister in a ridiculous manner, in the form of a short play or in the form of a short story or even a web series. Yeah, okay. So, and this was mentioned in Bakhtin's book Rebellious and His World. So with this we come to the end of formalism. And in the next few videos, we will start with new criticism, and also we'll come back to module 1 and we will continue with the Jacobean period. We stopped with Renaissance, we discussed Renaissance, we discussed Elizabethan poetry, the Tudor dynasty and the Elizabethan poetry, and also Elizabethan work. We did discuss Shakespeare, Spenser, and Sidney, and the era, that is the Elizabethan era, which is known as the golden era, was also discussed. Golden era of poetry was also discussed. Now we will shortly move on to the Jacobean period, and we shall hopefully go simultaneously. We'll take module 1 and module 2 simultaneously, so that we will be able to finish our portions on time. Thank you for listening, and keep safe. We do miss you terribly, so I hope you are all keeping safe. This pandemic is getting out of hands, so I request you not to go out unnecessarily, especially my boys. Don't go out unnecessarily. Yes, stay home, keep safe. My girls too. So wishing you all a very safe time. Thank you.